Hello, everybody. Hello, and welcome once again to Leadership Skills for Managers. I am Bill, the company's expert. Thank you for joining me today on this beautiful day. Yes, this is episode 16 of Leadership Skills for Managers. It's still a little bit of an experimental kind of thing. Ultimately, this is a live Q&A, but I've got a topic to talk about, and today the topic is the authenticity trap, why leaders can't always be real. So we're going to be talking about that. And of course, as always, if you have any thoughts on this or questions about it, you can get into the chat. If you are a subscriber to my channel and you've been so for any amount of time, you should be able to see a chat box somewhere near the video feed, depending on whatever device you're watching this on, and get in there and we can talk about it. I apologize for the late start today. I was detained, and then in grand Bill tradition, about 10 seconds before I'm supposed to go live, I went into a coughing fit. So it's always good to put your mind at ease, get yourself nice and composed and centered and ready to roll. There are 16 people here. Thank you for being here. You guys are awesome. Thank you for joining me today. As always, before we start out, just a shout out goes out to my YouTube channel members. You guys are awesome. Thanks for your support. That really means the world to me. And also to my Patreons, you guys too. And my super thanks donors. Those are always nice to get. And to my viewers and participants, you guys are awesome. Let's get into this today. So, the authenticity trap. This is something I've been wanting to talk about for a while. What the hell is authenticity, if you're watching this for the first time? Well, it's basically keeping it real, being able to share your true opinions and your true feelings. That's my definition of authenticity anyway. I don't know if that's the textbook definition, but as a lot of you guys might have noticed, people in leadership positions, whether those are managers in organizations or some other types of leaders, I don't know, in the world of politics or something, you really don't get a lot of authenticity. Everybody likes to comment on this. And what I think is interesting is somebody who's been kind of on the flip side of that, it's a lot harder than it looks. And if you have plans to climb the ladder to be in a position of authority where you are responsible for people and stuff, you may find that this is a position you're going to be in sometime soon, and you might need to be prepared for it a little bit. It's one of those aspects of leadership skills that people don't often talk about. So I figured we would talk about that today. Okay, so what I wanted to start, I made myself some notes here. I'm just going to be looking at my notes. That's why I'm always glancing that way, like a fool. I got two monitors here. It's up on the other monitor. This is not a very convenient way of doing this, but that's okay. So let's talk about a couple of things. First of all, this has been the case for a very long time. This is not some modern thing. This has been around for as long as we've had leaders, essentially, since ancient times. And the thing about leadership, when we talk about it today, at least I talk about it in the context of business, this really developed from the military. You go back 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago, and, they had figured out all the essentials of people management, except that it was in more of a military type context. How do you get people to behave the way you would have them behave? How do you influence them? How do you get feedback? How do you get them to buy into something? This was all born out of the military, essentially. That was, it makes a lot of sense. It was a matter of survival, and your survival depended on people cooperating and acting together according to a plan, And the problem with humans is that we all have our own perspective and our own thoughts, and we usually don't get along over, petty squabbles and things, and everybody's got their own opinion. So that gets in the way of working together to succeed as a group, right? So that was the idea. So the military figured this out a long time ago, and how to get all the people to work together and follow a plan. So that's where this comes from. So this isn't a modern thing. However, what is a modern thing is a real emphasis on authenticity. And I don't know about you guys can tell me what you think, but my personal opinion is that we seem to be obsessed about authenticity now, simultaneously, while being the most inauthentic as a society or as a species that we have ever been in, certainly in my lifetime. It's really, really puzzling, and maybe the emphasis on authenticity these days is possibly a reaction against the widespread inauthenticity that we're experiencing. I'm not sure. I'm sure social media has had something to do with it too. The ability to go on there and just, unfiltered, like, broadcast your feelings, and your thoughts and your opinions in an unfiltered kind of way, free from consequences. At least that's what it feels like. So that's kind of shaken things up a bit, right? For good and for bad. Okay, so hopefully, as we all know, leadership, if you are in charge of something, leaders, you cannot fully show your full opinions and your full feelings. There's a lot of reasons for this. We're going to get into them today. And I'm trying to look at my notes. My notes are not very useful. It's very scattered. I don't know how to present this topic. I've never tried, but that's what we're doing here for. And as always, if you guys have any thoughts on anything, get in the chat, and I can see the chat feed and I can react to it as we're going. So I can respond to that. We can go from there. But basically, the bottom, one of the main reasons why we can't be perfectly authentic when we're in a position of leadership, and you will encounter this when you get into a position of leadership, if that hasn't already happened. Okay, a lot of people who are not in a leadership position, it all looks so simple, right? You think, man, if I was in charge, I would just keep it real and I'd tell it like it is, and be damned with the consequences. Because in the end, the gain would be more than the loss. The pros would be more than the cons, right? And congratulations, that's the great attitude to have. Unfortunately, there's a hell of a lot of forces pushing you in the other direction. What can help is if you understand those forces, and so you're better equipped to deal with them and to possibly push back against them. Okay, so I'm just going to read some stuff here. So leaders representing organizations or groups cannot fully show their true feelings or opinions, as this could create conflicts or perceptions of unfairness among subordinates. So already you get into stuff that resonates with a lot of modern type thinking, like fairness and all this kind of stuff. I normally talk about job search and job interviews, things like that. A big sort of topic of conversation is bias in job interviews, right? Fairness, you have to consider everyone fairly, which is true. But then at the same time, you also have to filter people out based on a judgment call, right? You may have preferences, you may have opinions. All of those are going to be personal. They're going to be your personal opinions. Are they going to be some kind of universal truth? No, they're going to be your opinion. That's why you go to a company, you get rejected because they see your resume or they see you and they say, nope. And then you go somewhere else and they see your resume and they see you and they go, yes, we want you, right? It's all based on a judgment call, not some universal truth. It's just somebody's opinion, right? So the problem is if you start expressing your true opinions freely and completely and openly all the time, it can create perceptions of unfairness among subordinates. I mean, that's the thing. And generally, leaders want to avoid that if at all possible, right? You don't want everyone to think of you as unfair if they don't have to, right? Simply because you've got an opinion on something, right? So it may be appropriate to not broadcast your opinion if some people are going to have a problem with it, right? And if some of those people report to you, that could be an issue, right? So already you've got one thing pushing you to suppress your true opinions and your true feelings on things, right? It's the interest of fairness, right? It's a good cause. It's definitely a good thing. We have our first conflict, right? Okay, let's see here. There's a couple other things going on here too. Individuals or organizations seeking influence are almost universally not fully authentic. Have you noticed that? I saw a video on YouTube. I didn't actually watch the video, but I saw the thumbnail. And I can't remember what it was called, but it was basically to the effect of all YouTube gurus are liars or inauthentic, or they're trying to get at you or fool you or something like that. I can't comment. The thumbnail had like 3, I guess, prominent influence on it. I didn't recognize them, so I'm not a huge like person who's aware of everything that's going on YouTube or whatever. And I don't understand anything practically about TikTok. So I don't know who these people are, but yeah, exactly. If you're trying to influence people or you're trying to protect an image, you're going to have a ton of things pushing you to be inauthentic in a sense that you're not going to be wearing your opinions on your sleeve and your feelings on your sleeve. This is a universal thing because it's damaging. Because no matter what you think or what you say, somebody is going to take exception to it. On this channel, I've said this the other day, I've gotten a lot of hate for, of all things, in the first videos I did a few years ago, saying, "You're awesome." I got hate for that. People saying, "You don't know me. How the hell do you know? You think you know people. You think you know everything about people. You don't know anything. You're trying to like, I don't know, you're trying to like influence me or something." So I got like hate for that. I was like, okay. The reality is no matter what you put out there, no matter what opinions you have or what you say, you're going to get someone who takes exception to it. That's just the reality, no matter what it is, so as a result, you have to kind of censor yourself a little just to minimize the damage or the backlash, whatever you want to call it. That's another force. The other thing that I have noticed is that you see in this world, if you haven't figured this out yet, there are a lot of people trying to influence you. They're trying to have you behave the way that they would have you behave, and usually there's an incentive there that's self-serving. It's serving them. If you behave a certain way, there's some advantage to you behaving this way, or you thinking a thing and acting a certain way. There's a certain advantage to them. And so they're going to try and influence you to do something or to behave a certain way. And a lot of us, when we're younger, we tend to be more gullible, and we're not necessarily expecting that. And so we get fooled, I mean, I certainly did when I was younger. I probably still do today. But, you know what I mean? Unlike like a lot of people, I've had a lot of those experiences, and I learned from them. People that you think they're helping you, and you think that they have your interests at heart, but they actually don't. They have their own interests at heart, and those conflict with yours. But they disguise that under this mask of, I'm really your friend. I'm really looking out for you. That's my priority, when the reality is not that, right? So that's another thing. So in my opinion, people should be a lot more skeptical of what they hear, especially from people in positions of authority. A lot of younger people especially are overly trusting, and they get used because of that. I find, my personal opinion is that that's maybe a failing on the part of the educational system that is maybe conflicted, because they want students and things to conform. They want students to follow their rules, and it's not this big nefarious thing. It makes sense, but that creates a conflict. The conflict is when you're trying to encourage people to have critical thinking skills and to really consider the source, look for incentives, this kind of thing. that can encourage a more rebellious spirit in people. They're more skeptical, they're more cynical. That doesn't necessarily work in the interests of a school to implant that kind of attitude in your own students. You know what I mean? So, I mean, this is all conjecture on my part, but I think that that's definitely a thing. And, you know, I think that in young people, if I had a message to them today, I would say, like, you know, I would question people in authority that are advising you to do something. You know, think critically about it. You know, see if you can figure out if they have an angle, if they have an incentive. You know, because a lot of times there is, and you're not aware of it. And so as a result, they might not be advising you to do something that's fully in your own interest. You should maybe be skeptical of what they're saying. You know, one thing you can do is that helps you in this is sort of, like I always say, is don't just take your advice from one source, go to multiple sources and different types of sources, you know? You know what I mean? So the stuff that we talk about here on this channel, for example, we talk mainly about like job search, and a big part of that are job interviews. So that's what I end up talking about a lot. And, you know, the thing is, who can tell you about job interviews? Who's involved? Who would know, and who would you possibly listen to? Well, recruiters are one source. They're on the other side of the table, right? So that makes sense. Hiring managers are another one. They don't work in the HR department. They're just bosses, right? That's another party that's involved. What about other job seekers? You know, instead of talking to a recruiter and getting advice, maybe asking advice of like more seasoned job seekers who themselves have done many interviews over the years, and they might be able to give you advice that might not necessarily be the same as the recruiter, right? You know, so like that kind of thing. You don't just go to a recruiter or you go to 5 recruiters to get your advice. You go to a good cross section of different people that are involved. You know, other job seekers, hiring managers, recruiters, career advisors, maybe owners of companies, you know, this kind of thing, like all of them together, right? And between all of them, you'll hopefully get a diverse, if you see what I'm saying, a larger diversity of opinion, and you can decide within that what kind of rings true to you and what, you know, makes the most sense to you. Okay. The other thing I wanted to emphasize is that deliberate inauthenticity exists, right? Many entities intentionally behave inauthentically, right? They lie to you, basically, right? To deceive, to manipulate, or to exploit, right? Others for their own advantage, preying on those who are unaware or overly trusting. Couldn't have put it better myself if I had written that, which I did. You know, this is the thing. And I think that a lot of young people, they're not told this. They're not expecting this. So when they find out, it's usually at great cost, and then it takes them a bit of time, right? You know, I see there are 16 people here. Thank you for joining me today, listening to me ramble about this. But I want to ask you, in your experience, you know, when I was in school about 1 million decades ago, you know, there was definitely a sort of rebellious kind of thing going on with kids, with teenagers and stuff. You know, you had like the good kids that, you know, did everything they were supposed to, and they had sort of like the rebellious kids, and like teenage rebellion was a thing. And I get the I haven't heard of that in a long time. I haven't seen that, like, you know, in TV shows or on social media. I haven't heard anyone talk about it, you know? And it seems that people nowadays just conform more. Is that what you guys are seeing? Because that's kind of the impression I get. I don't know one way or another, but that's the impression I get. And I think this can be a bad thing. You know, you're losing that ability to think critically, you know? And I mean, I see it every day running this YouTube channel, for example, where we talk about job search. And, a lot of people will take advice from companies, right? In one sense, a company is your employer or could be your employer. So, okay, you're kind of partners in that respect. You want a mutually beneficial arrangement. So fair enough. But in another sense, and you guys don't need me to point this out, they are your adversary. Whenever you have a labor dispute between management and the workers, for example, they're adversaries. They're two different parties with conflicting incentives, right? So asking the management, if you're a worker, asking the management, what should I do? You know what I mean? They're not going to be authentic. They're going to advise you to do something completely against your own interest that serves them, right? They'll try and influence you to get you to feel happy with minimum wage. They'll try to influence you to think that we should get rid of minimum wage, so that people can work for less, and then we'll all have more jobs, right? You know what I mean? So just believing everything you hear, it's not necessarily a good thing, right? Inauthenticity is widespread. People are going to be trying to influence you for their own gain, right? This is a common thing. The reason why I wanted to do a live stream on this is because I think for a lot of people, especially young people, this is news. A lot of people are not really tuned into this that I've seen. So yeah. Incidentally, if you want to learn business, you want to learn leadership and all this kind of stuff, check out my course, $100 MBA. Links in the description. Okay, let's get into this. So why would people be inauthentic? Okay, why are there pressures for you to be inauthentic, meaning that you don't share your true opinions or your true feelings when you're in a leadership position? What are some of the forces at play? Okay, I've tried to outline several of these. Let's go through them. So number one is confidentiality, right? This is the first and most obvious thing. If you're a manager and you have subordinates, you're managing people, and obviously you have access to confidential information, like for example, how much everybody makes, right? What their compensation is for a start, things like that. The fact that you are privy to this, first of all, it means that you can't openly disclose that stuff, of course. But in addition, it means that, you can't come anywhere near it. You can't hint at, disclosing that stuff, disclosing it through circumstantial evidence or through, sort of indicative kind of conversation and things like this, or just being off the cuff about it. You can't disclose this. So leaders often hold sensitive information, things like financial data, personnel issues, who is about to be fired for performance issues, things like this. Like you can't, not only can you not talk about that, you can't hint it, you can't, like nothing like that. Strategic plans, you might know what's going on in the future. You might be privy to some long-term plans that have been kicked around or might be put into effect, but you can't announce it yet, right? Authentic disclosure is not possible because revealing the truth could breach trust, it could create legal risk, or it could harm the business, right? So these are very, very real concerns. They all push you in the direction of not being able to talk about certain things, And to go one step further, simply being privy to this information, okay, prevents obviously full authenticity. Leaders often have to act like they don't know it. It's not that they can't talk about it, but everyone knows that they know it. They go a step further and act like they don't know it, right? They don't say, oh yeah, I do know the long-term plan, I just can't talk about it. Instead, they'll try and convince you that, oh, I don't know any long-term plans, right? So it's like you abstract it one step further, right? Okay. So the bottom line is that the lack of authenticity is constrained by the role itself. It's not necessarily a personal choice. It's by being in that role, it comes with the territory. You just can't talk about this stuff. You can't indicate it in any way. right? And that's understood. If you were to breach that, not only would it be bad in terms of its direct effect, but you wouldn't be chosen to be in those roles in the future if that's how you behave, right? So you've got a lot of these forces pushing you in that direction. So hopefully that makes sense. Once again, get in the chat if people have any questions or comments or input on any of this. I'd like to hear from you, and I can see it and react to it. Number two, second reason that's pushing you in the direction of not being authentic when you're a leader, okay, is organizational representation. You are seen as someone who represents the organization. So when you start making statements, it's not going to be perceived as like, oh, that's just your personal opinion. It's going to be perceived as, oh, that's what the company openly thinks and openly supports, right? That's a problem. Okay, your words are interpreted as the stance of the whole organization or of the management, right? That's the problem right there. Okay, if you say something, by definition, everyone assumes that, oh, that was vetted and approved by all the higher ups, by your bosses, your stakeholders, all that kind of stuff. And that's not necessarily the case, right? Okay. So that's why you get a lot of people embracing the official line, the party line, playing it safe. Right? So this is a real effect, right? It really limits what you're allowed to say and not say. Because when you speak, you're not just speaking as yourself, you're speaking as, I represent the company, I represent my work group, I represent all the managers, I represent, the owners, I represent like everybody that's got a stake in this. So these are some pretty tough things to go against. You know what I'm saying? It all looks so easy when you're a worker. And I remember when I was, like essentially a worker, you have really strong opinions on this stuff and it all looks so easy from the outside. Once you're in the driver's seat, this stuff really, really is hard to push back against. In the sense that if you work in a big company, the first thing that's going to happen is you're pretty much almost immediately out the door if you violate some of these. Pretty serious. But the point I'm trying to make is that if we know this, we can think critically about the communication we get from our managers, leaders, etc., right? We understand their situation and we expect them to say certain things, and then we take it with a grain of salt because we understand that they can't be authentic, right? A lot of people don't realize this yet, and they just accept it as if it's their true thoughts and feelings about something, right? Sufyan Ali says, "Sir, I can understand English like I watched all of your live videos, but I can't speak English. So can you give some tips because it's important to speak English in interviews?" Well, I'm not here to teach English. I'm gratified that you can seem to understand my videos really well. I'm a bit of an audio buff. I always have been. And so, I don't just use default settings on all this software when I make videos and I do live streaming. I add equalization, I add compression, I add limiting, or parametric compression or companding, and in an effort to try and make my voice very clear. So it's compressed, but you can hear all the consonants very, very well. At least that's the hope, that's the intention. So it's frequency balanced, and there's not a lot of dynamic range, and that's intentional. So I've got a lot of compliments. People say that my voice is very intelligible. So if English is not your first language, people say my English is not my first language, but I like your videos because I can understand you very well. A lot of it has to do with that, I'm sure. But thank you for the feedback. Okay, so we've covered two big forces that push in the direction of not being authentic. It's very hard to be authentic when you're in a leadership position, when you're representing an organization, when you're managing people. very, very tough to push against those forces. Those two alone pretty much decide for most people that how they communicate, how they behave. And it pretty much puts a what do you call it? Like you slap a sort of ban on, you keeping it real and voicing your true opinions and your true feelings about a lot of things. Okay. But that's not all. There's a lot of other forces here that are pushing you in that direction too. For example, we talked about fairness. Okay. Fairness and neutrality. In team conflicts, like if you're managing a team and, one team member's got a difference of opinion with another team member. That's a pretty common thing, right? A leader cannot openly side with one person without due process, right? There's issues if you do that. Even if you think this person is right and this person's being an idiot, they're completely deluded, you can't just come down on the side of this person, in a sort of authentic kind of way. A lot of times, you have to really, really filter yourself, okay? Even if they privately feel someone is right, they must remain neutral until their facts are established. You can see the importance of doing that, right? Innocent until proved guilty. Get all your facts first and all that kind of stuff. Authenticity is limited by the duty to maintain fairness and team cohesion, right? These are real forces. So that's the third, fairness, that's the third sort of force pushing you. If you're perceived as being unfair, there are consequences. You get a lot of talented, good employees that leave because they don't want to work under you because you're perceived as being unfair, right? That's very important that you don't break that. Another force that's pushing you to being inauthentic, okay? Power dynamics. Leaders' opinions carry disproportionate weight. This is the reality. A casual comment to someone might feel like an order, right? That's how it's perceived. It's not how it's meant, but that's how it's often perceived, right? You can't predict 100% how people will perceive what you say, and you can't 100% control it either. And depending on the type of person, they're going to pick up on cues and things and read into it. And they might come to the wrong conclusions. And this is like a big one, right? Okay. To avoid unintentionally pressuring employees, leaders must withhold some authentic feelings. That's the reality, right? So that's another force pushing us when we're in a leadership position to being inauthentic, right? This is a hard one to push back. You can keep it real and then you risk alienating a lot of people not because what you said was that bad, but because they read into it a lot of things, right? They perceive like, oh, you shared your opinion on this, and unbeknownst to you, they hold the opposite opinion on that thing. So they feel like, oh, I'm not welcome here. I don't fit in. The boss is biased against me, all this. That all is usually not true, but a lot of times it can be perceived that way, right? So you got to watch what you're doing and what you're saying on certain things, It's pushing you in that direction. And when you're more experienced with this, you tend to not take the risk, Another force, credibility, okay? Leaders are scrutinized constantly by employees, peers, shareholders, and customers. They cannot afford to show every frustration or every insecurity or bias without undermining confidence in their leadership. It's just the reality. If you say, oh, I'm worried about this, I'm worried about that, we don't really have a really good plan in place for countering this, so that might be a liability. If you broadcast that kind of stuff, the people that you need to be confident in you are all of a sudden not confident in you. When you see, for example, when you see CEOs of publicly traded companies signal this kind of stuff, not that they do because they know all this, but whenever they do, if ever they do, rarely, you see the stock price plummet, just based on the fears of they've said, oh, they're nervous about this. That shows they're, they may not be a solid investment. They might, not have a solid plan in place and be unassailable in that area. They're worried about it, right? Very, very hard to communicate this stuff. Usually this is done in confidence. You can't sort of broadcast this stuff. So therefore, you can't admit any of this stuff publicly, and therefore you're inauthentic. You can't say what you think, and you can't say what you feel, because you're going to be punished for this kind of stuff. This is a game I had to play for a few years, and it sucked. It really, really sucked. It was very hard to have, honest discussions about certain things in certain situations, in certain circles, because of this, And this is actually the beginning of the thing that has led to companies posting fake jobs, by the way, where they want to signal that, oh, we're growing and we're successful, so we're always hiring. We're hiring for all these positions, right? And maybe they justify it I'm being kind. Maybe they justify it internally by saying like, well, we're always looking for, talented people to come in and join, even if we're not technically hiring right now, right? So they put out job postings. And really what it's to do, the whole point of that is so that it signals to, stakeholders, to investors and competitors and would-be partners and, other people in the business environment that your company is doing well. We want them to think we're doing well. So we're saying we're hiring because that suggests we're growing. And if we're growing, then we're profitable and we have confidence in the future, right? So, that's what driving us. It's an extension of this principle that's leading to a lot of those kind of shenanigans, right? But when you bring it back down to sort of like the personal level, it's very hard to have conversations about certain things if you're expressing, we may not be totally confident and we may not have the solution to everything right now. That's the real conflict. If you suggest otherwise, then this comes back to bite you. So this is a big driver of people not being authentic in leadership positions. Okay, we've been through 5 of these so far, 5 big reasons, big forces that are pushing you to not be authentic, that are harming your ability to be authentic and disclose your true opinions and your true feelings. We've done 5. I've got 2 more for you. Okay, the next one is influencing. Okay, or strategic communication, shall we say. So leaders must tailor their message to motivate, persuade, and calm stakeholders, right? They want people to behave the way that they would have them behave, that suits them, right? Okay, now the lengths that some people go in this area are staggering, right? It's basically brainwashing, thought control, that kind of stuff. That's essentially where it's going. That's the extreme form of it. It may not be this super nefarious, underhanded thing that I'm making it out to be a lot of times, but it does tend to go in that direction and can be easily taken to where a lot of reasonable people would consider to be too far, right? It's unreasonable. So sometimes authenticity, that's saying exactly what you think, would demoralize or confuse people. Okay, so if you're a manager, you're in charge of a team or a work group or something like this, right? On the one hand, you want to be honest about things. On the other hand, you've got to be wary of demoralizing the people working under you, right? Or confusing them, right? These are real priorities. Okay, filtering serves the larger business perspective. It's just that simple, right? For example, any company that has a product or a service they're trying to sell, they're really not going to express any kind of concern about the quality of that product or service, right? They're going to be very reluctant to admit to it, even when it's true. When there's a lot of feedback coming back from customers that say, this is not working very well. right? And you've got a lot of forces pushing you to say, listen, like even marketing forces, excuse me, pushing you to admit, yes, you're absolutely right. We know that this could be improved, to put it mildly. This could definitely be improved. We recognize that there are some issues with this product or service, and we want to preserve the good relationship that we have with our customers. So we want to admit this. We want to recognize and say, listen, we hear you. We're taking it seriously and we're working on it. Even something as benign as that, you've got a lot of forces pushing you to say, don't admit that, because when it comes to trying to sell it, you are shooting yourself in the foot sometimes. So it's interesting how different organizations handle this different ways. Some of the better ones, they do the right thing. They admit that, it's got some flaws to it, and they'll even take a hit in terms of sales, right? To prioritize maintaining the relationships they have with their existing customers, But a lot of times you don't get that. You get people that say, nope, it's a perfect product. There's nothing wrong with it. Anything you might have heard is false, right? So talk about being inauthentic, right? You're deliberately contradicting someone who's telling you the truth, right? A lot of forces pushing you in this. Now, this is one that you can push back against to a degree. Okay, this one isn't like sort of absolutely essential, but it's there. And depending on the industry you're in and the organization we're talking about, what the culture is, it may be possible to push back against this. But yet there's a lot of people that don't. I've noticed that quite a bit. And finally, we come to number 7, the last kind of factor or force that's pushing you to filter yourself and not be authentic, okay, is external manipulation. Protecting yourself from external manipulation, okay? Competitors, the media, or opportunistic players, right, may exploit raw honesty, right? Somebody picks up on the fact that you just admitted that, the product you just put out might have some flaws. You're showing solidarity with your customers. You're admitting to their concerns that this doesn't work that well, and we may need to improve this in the next version, right? But maybe someone in the media decides to create a story out of this and say, big headline, this company releases crap product. It's sensational, it's newsworthy, and therefore the media likes that, right? And they do it at your expense. So, in order to avoid that, here's another factor pushing you in the direction of not being authentic, not admitting to, this product has a flaw. You know what I mean? You can't express your true opinions or your true feelings on it. Leaders must protect themselves and their organization by controlling what they reveal and how. Okay, this is not really a stretch of logic here. I'm sure everyone here has observed this. But this is a real factor. It's an opportunistic type thing that someone can come in, take what you're saying, and use it to their own advantage, right? This is a huge one. And for people that are more experienced, or you have bosses that are more experienced in this, and they've been burned a few times on this, it's going to be very, very hard to justify yourself, when you're exposing yourself to this kind of risk, right? So there you go. So that's 7 factors that push us in the direction of not being authentic as a leader, despite how much you want to be. These are the forces that are all pushing together, for you to not reveal your true opinions or your true feelings on things. And these are significant. And the people that succeed in being able to push back against them are the ones that understand these. They're not just ignorant of them, They think, oh, I don't need to do that. They're ignorant of, how this stuff works. I've seen people try that, and usually they don't last very long. The people that actually can push back against this stuff and win are people that fully understand it. We got a comment here. Niam Amir says, hello, I used the tips in your videos for my interview last week and I got accepted for the role. Thank you very much for these great videos. Well, thank you for letting me know, Niam Amir. That's great news. And I'm glad that you're prospering and things are working out there. Congratulations. And yeah, and also thank you for being here. So there you go. So there's my little blurb on authenticity. I don't know how appealing this was. We didn't get a very big audience for it, but this is still a very, very critical, real world thing for people that want to climb the ladder and go into management, this kind of thing. So very, very real world type thing that you're going to be smashing right up against in your first management type role, or as you go higher, you're going to discover a whole new level of this stuff. This is one of the reasons why I did not last as a CEO. Some people can be CEOs in the same way that some people are just cut out to be lawyers. They can argue any position based on who's paying them, and they're okay with that. I'm not necessarily being cynical about it, but I've noticed that in my experience, these people seem to have some kind of rationalization or justification for doing this that works for them, so they don't feel presumably like an immoral type person, but whatever the mechanism, it sort of helps them justify what they're doing to themselves, as we all do. Personally, I got to the point where I really couldn't push any further in that direction. When some things feel bad, they just feel bad. And, there's a limit to what you can push yourself to do that's kind of against your conscience and stuff like that. I'm making it out to be very melodramatic. It really isn't. It was just, I didn't particularly enjoy that kind of thing. As evidenced by the fact that in my kind of retirement, as it were, I have a YouTube channel. I like saying my opinions and I like giving my take on things. And, it was very hard to suppress that. I think some people have, they have a harder time suppressing that than others. So I was definitely one of those. And that's why I had a bit of an issue with this. And so that's why I consider this something worth discussing. Because at the end of the day, it's not about technical skills. What ends up steering your career are things like this. You're just not okay, or things just don't sit right with you with certain jobs. And it has nothing to do with technically what the job is. It's a lot of the soft skills and a lot of the people factors and all that kind of stuff. So that's what at the end of the day ends up being the important stuff. So anyway, if you found this useful, that's great. If you are interested in learning business, either to work for yourself or to understand your employer, or even if you get money at some point in your life, if that's now or later, to prevent you from pissing it all away and retaining it and having it grow, learn business. Business is the scientific study of how to make money. Very, very useful thing for a variety of different reasons. So if you're wanting to do that, check out that course. I put that course together. For what it's worth, I have an MBA, and what I did is I just put together a sort of reading list of some of the best textbooks in the world that are being used in MBA programs right now. I personally have read all these books, so I know what they are. They're the same books that you would read when you take, for example, an MBA from Harvard Business School, right? So, you're not getting the actual knowledge from me personally. You're getting it from the book. It's a self-study type thing. You read the books. Now you can skim the material and just get like a cursory overview, or you could go really, really in depth. It depends what your goals are. But what this does is this gives you the flexibility to go as deep as you want, to do it entirely on your own schedule, take as much time as you want, And if you're interested in one area, but not really interested in another area, it doesn't force you to learn everything. So you can really adapt it to serve you, whatever your goals are. So if that's what you're interested in, check this out. There's a link in the description box below this live stream. And I've also made videos on my courses that describe them, how they work and what you get and all that kind of stuff. So if you're interested in that, check it out. Best bang for the buck anywhere for learning business. Jopan says, should we censor our social media to match up with the job's employer's philosophy? Well, I can't tell you what you should do. It depends on what your goals are. And it also depends on what jobs you're putting yourself up for and what kinds of things you're saying on social media too, right? If you're saying a lot of like really extreme stuff and it's pretty easy to find you online, that might be a liability depending on what jobs you're going for. Okay, so yes, the fact that you're asking this question signals to me that you realize this might be a concern. So it could be. I can't say whether it will or not be for you, but this is something you definitely want to pay attention to. Now, if there's some way that you could do a lot of that stuff, either if it's not important to you, I would say just don't do it. If it is important to you and you need to have a voice, I'm not saying, you need to cut that out, but maybe do it in a way that manages the risk. Maybe you do it under a pseudonym or, you hide your identity from it or something so that it limits the risk, right? Or it's not as easily discoverable in some way. I mean, there's ways to do this stuff, right? But for example, if you are applying for a job and you've got, your resume and you've got your full name and then you've got your links to your social media stuff, you might put like a LinkedIn account or something. Some people might even put like Facebook and stuff, on there. If there's questionable things on your Facebook account, don't put your Facebook link, right? If someone can easily do a Google search on you and within 10 seconds find your Facebook account, they Google like your name and then your city or something like that, and bam, there it is. And it's got a bunch of weird stuff on it, a bunch of political things. Maybe you're, saying derogatory things about different people or different things. That can be a factor. So if that's you, you might want to get a plan together. And what I would do is I can't give you great advice that's very specific right off the hop, but I would look into it. Start with a simple chat GPT question and get it to give you some basic ideas. And then, you can investigate that more and see what you can do that will minimize any fallout from that stuff. But that's a great question, Jopan. That's a very real concern. And, in a perfect world, we would kind of just not do a lot of stuff that's going to get us into hot water, or at least not publicly. You know what I mean? But, you only live once and you're only young once. And I understand, so the plan then should be to manage the risk. Okay. You do it, but you manage the risk, right? The other element that I've noticed, and I've had experiences with people not understanding this, is that, like, for example, if you work at a company and you advertise the fact that you work there, it's very easy to find that you work there. You're wearing a company shirt or something, that's all over social media. You say, oh, I work at this company in this location. That's all out there. But then in the same social media account, like maybe a Facebook account or a Twitter account, whatever, X, you are also posting highly political, highly offensive stuff to some people. That can get you into hot water too. So you've got two choices: either cut it out or, keep doing it if it's important to you, but limit the risk. Like, don't do it where people can easily identify you and identify exactly where you work. And, because the company can have a legitimate beef where it says, look, you've got an X account. You're saying all kinds of things that we don't agree with, like online. And then you're identifying us with the things you're saying. You have a big picture where you're like standing in front of our, the company logo, like where you work or something. Everybody can see you work for us, and you're saying these things. That's not okay. We're getting the fallout from this, right? So you have the right to say whatever you want. In a lot of countries, you have like freedom of speech. You can say, but to my knowledge, there isn't a country that has like the right of freedom of speech, but yet the right to have absolutely no consequences for it, And so a lot of employers can say, well, you have the right to say what you want. We can't tell you not to say that. But if you're going to say it and identify it with us, we have the perfect right to say, sorry, you can't work here, So you have to choose, which is it going to be? Do you want to say those things, or do you want to work here? But you can't do both. We have the right to decide who works for us. That's how that works. No one can tell us you have to employ somebody who is going to be very vocal about saying things that are really not okay, that most human beings would agree is not okay, and then identifying fully and openly with us when we don't endorse any of these opinions. We don't agree with any of these opinions, but yet now we're being identified with them, right? So a lot of, if people just understand that's half the battle. I can't talk today. Where I've seen this, it's usually been in a situation where the person is ignorant of like, oh, I didn't know that was a thing. I thought I could just say whatever I want, identify that I work here, and everything's fine. It's like, no, depending on what you're saying, So there you go. So that's kind of some rambling trip to nowhere, talking about that kind of thing. Hopefully that's helpful, but maybe I'm just engaging in wishful thinking. But good question, Joe Pan. That's a very smart question. I think a lot of other job seekers, especially young ones, should be thinking about that kind of thing. They would have an easier time if they were. Okay, I think we're going to wrap this up. Thank you for being here. You guys are awesome. I will be back same time next week with another episode of Leadership Skills for Managers. If you have any suggestions for topics, please let me know. I'm always looking for stuff that you guys are interested in, not just what I'm interested in. So let me know in the comments if you have any of those. Otherwise, have yourself a great weekend. I will be back live in about half an hour with another live stream on job search. So if you're interested in that, stick around. Other than that, I'll see you soon. Take care.